Hello, hello, true crime fans. Welcome back to For Criming Out Loud and our bedtime series called Crime Me to Sleep. We have been reading Buried Beneath the Boarding House, and this is the 8th episode. So if you're new here, make sure you subscribe so you can go into the playlists and start any true crime book that we've covered from the very beginning. Let's get into episode 8 of Buried Beneath the Boarding House. One Way Out. As skilled as Dorothea was in the kitchen, it made sense for her to seek out the expertise for her first investment. The fact that she had also got to spin her old story about running a seafood restaurant in San Francisco again was just a fringe benefit. Through her connections in the upper crust of Sacramento society, Dorothea was able to track down an up-and-coming catering company that was looking to establish a physical presence for itself on the street. A company started and operated by a woman named Ruth Monroe. The initial investment for the company and much of the support that Ruth had received during its early years had come from her husband, but now that he had taken ill, the business was faltering along with him. Dorothea was like an angel swooping down from on high to invest in the company and get it back on track. The two of them opened up a food service business together, taking over the food side of the Round Corner Tavern in Midtown, continuing to support the lower income segment of Sacramento's population with affordable meals, while also pulling in enough money to draw a small wage. Dorothea split her time between the eatery and her other ventures, initially spending a decent amount of time in the kitchen before she grew increasingly bored with the actual work and drifted back to her boarding house. Ruth didn't mind at all. The business was doing well enough to support employees, and the financial backing that Dorothea provided was more than enough of a contribution. Gradually, the two women became friends, even though Dorothea had no real blueprint for that kind of relationship. Her prison friendships had always been built on necessity and manipulation. Her charitable work had always had an underlying financial transaction, and her relationships with her residents and the homeless were similarly weighted by a balance of needs and demands. But in Ruth, she found someone with whom she wanted to spend time with for no reason beyond enjoying her company. Dorothea did not know how to deal with this dynamic, and that made her too uncomfortable to embrace it. By the spring of 1982, the year after their partnership was formed, the dynamic shifted in more ways than one. Dorothea had been fed information from the police department warning that her redirected government checks had been spotted and that evidence was being gathered against her. While there was nothing tying her to the earlier drugging and robberies yet, the men whom she had defrauded of their pensions and disability benefits were much more open with the police, and connections were being made. In light of the allegations against her, the police were now giving some of the theft complaints from her residents a closer look. Without a doubt, they would come up with evidence sooner rather than later that all of the claims against the woman, were true. Dorothea had to manufacture a way out of the situation before the police had finished their investigation, or she was headed back to jail, goodwill of the city or no. Meanwhile, Ruth's life was marred by a fresh tragedy. Her husband's health had taken a turn for the worse, and he had been committed to the hospital for full-time palliative care. He was losing his battle with cancer so badly that the doctors were unwilling to prescribe him anything more aggressive than painkillers. Everyone knew that he was dying and that it was just a matter of time, but nobody could do anything about it. The cost of his care began to take a toll on Ruth, and eventually she was forced to sell off the family home for a fraction of his worth to ensure that he wouldn't be ejected from his bed. This left her with nowhere to stay and nobody to turn to. Her children lived out of town, and she would have had to give up her whole life, business, and any hope of visiting her husband during his final days if she went to stay with them. Without a second thought, Dorothea offered Ruth a room in her apartment above the boarding house. They were partners in business, and there was no reason to think that their excellent relationship wouldn't carry over into a shared home life of similar compatibility. Ruth was initially surprised at Dorothea's opening her home to her, but soon accepted readily. She couldn't have been less prepared for the way that she was treated in her business partner's home. It was as though she were royalty. Dorothea went beyond being merely a good hostess, but over the top into a level of kindness and attentiveness that nobody could have expected. Ruth could see why so many people wanted to stay in Dorothea's boarding house if they were all treated this way. To begin with, it was like a dream come true. Then, the sickness struck. Ruth found herself sluggish in the mornings, too tired to do much of anything throughout the day. Dorothea waited on her hand and foot during those strange bouts of weakness, and Ruth soon found herself indulging in cocktails to calm her nerves, despite spending a lifetime sober. The alcohol took the edge off her panic at her condition and provided Dorothea and her cocktail shaker with an easy way to administer the drugs that were causing Ruth's illness to begin with. In early April, a few weeks after Ruth moved in, William Clausen, her son, came to visit after hearing about her illness, traveling to Sacramento from his home out in Southland Park. He was shocked to find her with a creme de menthe in her hand, giggling away quite happily. She was pallid, too weak to stand, and seemingly unconcerned. Dorothea was taking good care of her. She used to be a nurse. They had nothing to worry about, nothing at all. The whole situation was suspicious. He'd never even heard of this Dorothea woman until a few weeks ago, and now, suddenly, she was his mother's best friend, providing her with around-the-clock care. Something didn't add up, but every time he tried to talk to Ruth about the situation, Dorothea contrived a reason to be there, watching and waiting, ready with excuses. He was on the receiving end of many of Dorothea's tales during his visit, all of them calculated to paint the white-haired woman as a saint of Sacramento. All of her charitable work, her history as a nurse, her current role as medical advisor to the undocumented immigrants and frightened housewives of the city, they all painted a picture of her as the kind of woman who could be trusted with his mother's life. But something about her blank-eyed stare just didn't fill him with confidence. She could say all of the right words and go through all of the right motions, but the emotion never ran deeper than the surface. Disturbed and confused, William had to head home to his family at the end of the day, but his suspicions would not abate. He knew in his gut that something was wrong with the situation on F Street, but all of the pieces weren't in place yet for him to see the bigger picture. By the end of 1982, April, Ruth was dead, and the police were swarming through the apartment above the guest house. With other outstanding investigations against Dorothea, she was the natural suspect in her business partner's death. But the interviewing detectives found no trace of the calculating killer they had hoped to find. Dorothea seemed distraught at the loss of her friend, devastated at the closure of her business, and traumatized by the aggressive questioning that she had been subjected to. She was hardly anyone's picture of a murderer. The investigating officers wanted to find some other explanation for Ruth's death, and Dorothea delivered it to them, gift-wrapped. Ruth's husband was in the hospital dying, and she'd been profoundly depressed about the whole situation. Depressed and drinking. The coroner discovered a massive overdose of Ruth's prescribed medications in her system, mixed with a cocktail of over-the-counter drugs that would have been readily available to anyone with ready cash. Suicide seemed to be the obvious explanation. If killing another human being had any effect on Dorothea, then it certainly wasn't visible. She went about the same routines as always, tending to her residents, picking up pensioners and forging their checks, and processing the necessary paperwork to shut down operations in the Round Corner Tavern and disperse the few employees that they had managed to hold on to during Ruth's illness. She told everyone and anyone about the tragic suicide of her friend, repeating the same story over and over for sympathy, making it, like so many other lies, into a part of her own life story. The great piecemeal fiction that she used as a shield against the pain of encroaching reality and as a tool to deflect any sense of responsibility for her actions. By the end of the investigation, it's possible that she had even managed to convince herself that it was the truth, that the pills she had ground up and mixed into Ruth's drinks weren't nearly enough to kill her, and the painkillers that had been poured down the old woman's neck didn't have the power to take a life. There was a massive disconnect from the actions that she had taken and the end result, and that was all that she needed to entertain some sort of reasonable doubt. Maybe Ruth had taken more pills. Maybe she had been knocking them back in a genuine suicide attempt every time that Dorothea's back was turned. Surely it was possible that the official version of the events was the true one. That she had watched with tearful eyes as her beloved friend and business partner took her own life. The truth had always been a malleable thing for Dorothea, and now that she was faced with the starkest and most evil thing that she had ever done, it was hardly surprising that she shied away from the truth on a grand scale. William was not satisfied when the official case was closed. He knew that Dorothea was responsible for his mother's death, even if he didn't know how or why. But it took him weeks of poring over his mother's accounts before he realized the motive behind the killing. Ever since she had moved into the F Street apartment, transfers had started from her savings account into her business, payments that gradually increased until they were a steady flow, draining away all of the money from the sale of Ruth's home into the joint account that Dorothea also had access to. As the executor of her estate, William could see the money sitting in that joint account, going nowhere, and he was poised to report the theft to the police the very moment that Dorothea tried to withdraw anything. He underestimated Dorothea. The other investigations into her fraudulent activities were closing in, and the report of a robbery from Malcolm Mackenzie had just added more fuel to the fire. Dorothea's informants within the department were falling silent one by one, with her most stalwart supporters trying to direct her to a decent criminal lawyer. None of that was necessary. She had a plan, and now she had the cash she needed to put it all into motion. Unfortunately for Dorothea, the police trap snapped shut faster than she had anticipated. They caught wind of the fact that their prime suspect had booked a plane ticket to Mexico and caught her as she was heading for the taxi with her luggage in tow. All of her plans to start a new life south of the border with Ruth's savings as a nest egg fell apart on contact with the cold reality that she had been caught. Still, her unexpected move did net some benefits. The 30 or more fraud cases that were being pulled together against her still weren't completely investigated by August when she had her day in court, and the judge, Roger Warren, insisted on discounting them and any previous convictions when the time came to pass sentence on her. He was moved by Dorothea's doddering old mother act and was aware of her connections to the upper echelons of society. Access to celebrities might have vanished the moment that she was arrested, but not all of the benefits of her long-standing contributions evaporated so quickly. She was given the benefit of the doubt where nobody else would have. For the 3 robberies that she was convicted of, as a result of the few completed investigations, she was to serve 5 years, and as terms of her parole afterwards, she would no longer be allowed to run a boarding house or work with people of diminished capacity. The elderly, the mentally ill, the disabled, the addicted, all of the people that she had made her fortune exploiting would be forever out of reach for her as long as she abided by the terms of her parole. This may have just become the latest in a long line of criminal schemes for Dorothea, but over the years, she had found herself becoming the mask that she had crafted so diligently. She loved the lifestyle, the celebrity status, and the attention that her life as a pillar of the Hispanic community had granted her. And she felt the loss of all of that considerably more than the loss of her freedom. So, instead of settling into a life of comfort and respect as La Doctora in Mexico City, Dorothea now found herself in the Sacramento County Jail. That wraps up episode 8 of Buried Beneath the Boarding House. If you're enjoying this new bedtime book series so far, please make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. You know, all the YouTube-y things. Also, if there's a true crime book that you would like me to cover, let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for being here. I truly appreciate all your support in our series, Crime Me to Sleep. Until next time, good night.